got problems with Doctor Who. I think it's unhelpful because it's on telly. If it was all written down and read as books by teenagers and it never got made into a television programme, it would be ripe now for making an origin story Doctor Who, what the fuck really happened for all of time and space series. But because it's got so much baggage, because it's on telly and obviously it's a fictional character and it was invented by the BBC and a whole load of heads that just tweaked all of the storylines that are possible and owned by the BBC as a corporation, it's all a bit tainted now.
Well, where I'm at with that question, Toby, because it brings up that question for me, because it's a fictional story. It's in league with the military all the way along. There are rulers over the whole planet. Our true history isn't known in it. They do a British sacred site being a portal to another dimension type of thing, but it's nothing like the real world. It's got nothing to do with any fairy mythology for real in it. It's just a sci-fi using the idea that it's a portal, but no truth in it.
Yeah.
So the very purpose of the Doctor Who stuff is to cover over the truth. Yeah, so the Doctor Who stories aren't the truth, but they've got elements of truth in them.
Well, I had a real problem because a psychological problem that identifying with the Doctor character too much, like I said before, it wraps around your heart like a little tentacly Dalek.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up only having thoughts that the Doctor would have in a world that doesn't allow for time travel. It's really unhealthy.
And he's very highbrowed, insulting, has no empathy.
He's a fucking narcissist.
You know, he's fucked up.
He's a narcissist.
Yeah.
And seriously traumatized from the Time War. So he doesn't even know.
Story, but yeah.
He doesn't even know who he is.
Like, all those things are the truths about him.
Yeah.
Like, apply those things to us. We don't know who we are. We are traumatized. There was a time war.
Yeah.
All those things are true, you see, but Doctor Who isn't depicting the truth.
No.
It's depicting a twisting of the truth. It's depicting an unreal thing.
If we had a letter from the Crown that said, all right, do a true version. And we started with this octopus story as an origin story, basic reboot, a cold reboot for the American audience. Is that something you'd want to help write?
Okay, so I'm in the position of, I must write because I have this stuff in me.
Yeah.
I must write because the stuff I have in me is not the stuff that's out on the internet. I must write because if I don't write, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm just sitting on the sidelines, not sharing out of some meekness and some programmedness.
Yeah.
I'm not sharing because I did share in the past, and the cost of it was just too heavy. It was fucking madness.
Yeah. Same.
So there's an element of trying to find my own grounding instead of just being out there saying this and then saying that and then this and then that and then this and then that and then this and then that in reaction.
Yeah.
So I'm not wanting to be in reaction, so I'm finding my own center in myself and all that. So that brings it back to one's own real life.
Yeah.
So the thing with the Doctor Who thing, like you just said, is the films out there, programs.
Yes.
We reach to those programs for knowledge because we watched them for knowledge. Really explicit in my case in watching the Doctor Who, because I wasn't watching it for entertainment particularly. I watched it because Tara told me that one of the episodes that she'd watched depicted the very same stuff as what I've been talking about lately. So, well, all right, then maybe there's more of them. And I sat through 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 fucking episodes where there was no deep story in it at all. And I'm like, oh, this is a bit weird watching this and stuff. But sure enough, out of watching all of them, there are maybe 6 or 7 or 8 themes that are real. that are covered over with Doctor Who in the same way as the real mythologies are covered over with history. So that pattern of replicating the truth with an untruth, of giving us something to look at that's near the truth, but isn't the truth. So you're still not seeing the truth, and you're not looking for it either, because you're seeing this other thing that isn't the truth, and it's a made-up story, and you know it's made up by the BBC, and you know it's just not real. So there has to be a cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And it's the same, the truth movement is doing the same thing to everyone. Everyone's looking at stuff in the truth movement, looking for information, and then having to draw from that information to deal with stuff in their real world. And so it's what version of the truth movement do you believe in has become what versions of Christianity do you believe in. So the flat earthers can't talk to the non-flat earthers, and the right wingers can't talk to the left wingers, and all of that kind of thing. So what's that doing? On the one hand, it's just bringing up stuff that's in us anyway and bringing that out to a fruition. But how big is the lie that we're dealing with here? So one thing I'm looking at is 2,000 years since Jesus just isn't a truth. There's nothing to back it up that I'm aware of in any sense whatsoever. And the idea of the Romans ruling over us for 2,000 years, that doesn't seem to have to be true.
No.
And when I really look at things, I'm looking at, okay, in the last 400 years, it looks like something's come to the planet which has entered a phase where it's going to create technology and create the artificial intelligence. And over the space of 400 years, that's what's happened. But before 400 years ago, it ain't really there. It certainly hasn't got control of all of Europe 400 years ago.
So
something along that lines is what I'm looking at, is how us being taught history all our lives has made us think this 2,000-year thing, and then back to the Stone Age people. And just as an experiment, thinking, okay, the Stone Age world was all still functioning up until 400 years ago, and the war against the Stone Age peoples is only like 400 years old, not something that died out thousands of years ago.
Fair point.
And it's a very different paradigm to look at it as being, someone like me isn't such an anomaly, or whatever the right word. I'm not so
anachronism. You're not so anachronistic.
Okay. I'm not so much of a thing that I don't really know what it means.
Well, anachronism is outside of time.
Okay.
Yeah. Anachronistic means outside of time. So you've got a whole, in inverted commas, Celtic, Iron Age, social.
I've got a separate memory stream.
Right. It's anachronistic, that's the word.
What I don't have is I'm not programmed with a belief that I'm descended from some Normans or some Saxons or some English or something like that. What I have is a sense that I'm descended from some people who lived fully with the earth.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem to have been thousands of years ago. That seems really present. And living at the dune, or the friends that I know in Ireland, or the way I lived with the boat or stuff like that, is still living completely with the land. So the last 3 years of being on the internet every day is a new thing for me. And attempting to just live in a modern day life is a new thing for me. I've managed to avoid that all my life entirely, and at this stage I've stepped back enough to stop living in my imagination so much and actually see what it's like in the real world.
You seem to have landed it pretty well.
Huh?
You seem to have landed it pretty well.
It's a fucking daily struggle, is a fair enough word. It isn't easy to maintain whatever it is I'm doing.
But you are, nevertheless, maintaining it.
Yeah. Every day. Yeah. So in terms of all what we're talking about here with the Doctor Who stuff, if we're to write stuff, let's write stuff as. The thing about me that's peculiar is I do have a mythic character that's known in the world. My mythic character is far more well known than I am. Not many people who know me, they just know the poet. And they just projected onto that archetype of the poet and didn't really get to know me. So that's the strange thing. That's my anachronism, is that I have acted in such a way in the world where I was so fearless and so outspoken and speaking stuff that came not from English or even Irish mortal world knowledge or something. I haven't believed in what the humans believed in. I haven't really even fucking understood what it is they're talking about. I've just been living in a kind of a fairy realm and have been fully able to sustain living in that fairy realm. But by this stage, I'm like, ooh, what's real messages from the earth and what's inherited messages from the human mind? Because I've been out talking to the fucking humans for 20 odd years now. And I've been trying to learn about the humans. What are you all on about? And so I've learned all of this religious stuff and all this spirituality stuff and all this conspiracy stuff and all the rest. But none of it's really true. It hasn't come from in me. So the last few years, I've just been trying to redefine what's actually coming from inside of me in my memory and what stuff I've learned out there that's inaccurate. So it's hard to trust one's own intuition these days, because actually I could be fucking getting my intuition from the artificial intelligence, or from demons, or from things that have possessed me, or from beliefs that were hardwired during blackouts or something.
Well, that's why I had to give up on Doctor Who as a mindful altogether.
Yeah, because it's not real.
It's not real and it's not healthy. Being in a non-real state of being, it's not good for you.
In that case, like, for you, it's been pretty much that you have been in a cult.
Yeah.
And believing in the beliefs of that cult and playing by the rules of that cult, which are different from society's rules. In my case, the closest I have to that is being amongst festivally type people and alternatively type people, and living amongst all of them and taking it as if that alternative world is real.
Well, I grew up in the festival. My first 7 years were in festival. And then we got divorced from that reality. And so I was really heartbroken by not being able to relate on that level with people.
Okay, but in all that, what I found is that the alternative festival world isn't real.
No, it's not either.
No, it's no more real than the Doctor Who stuff. So for me, I just have to shunt off all that festively type belief system stuff and the drug experiences and stuff, and try and redefine what's actually me and what's the influence of the drugs. What's the influence of the culture I was in with the taking of the drugs, where it suggested that all these multidimensional things are realities. And there are all these daft stories about aliens and daft stories about Palladians and daft stories about conspiracies and daft stories about people who think they've achieved spiritual this and that and the other, and daft stories about modern day druids and all the other religions and the living in Glastonbury. So I've lived in a place that's like Doctor Who in living in Glastonbury. But then in going back to Ireland in between times, there's a magical realm that is going on in Ireland that is actual earth medicine magic, with real souls in them still, really living on that level. But on a surface level, pretty much everybody's living in the modern world. But to some degree, the people I've mostly known in Ireland are relatively untouched by that modern world. It's not actually directing all their thoughts or their decision makings. So in the same way as I don't want to go around wearing virtual reality goggles all day long every day, because that's just a new thing. I have friends in Ireland who are still just not doing the mobile phones and stuff. Still not really doing the internet. Because they are busy in the real world actually planting trees and recycling stuff and visiting springs and visiting sacred sites and keeping that connection with the imaginary world in the real in Ireland alive. So there's some percentage of people in Ireland still living really true with the land, although under constant attack, you could say, from the New Agey stuff, which is now quite big in Ireland, and the witchy druid stuff, which has become quite big in Ireland. And that everybody has got the mobile phones pretty much, and they are touch screens, and they are dependent on them. And so somewhere in that is to work out, here we are, Toby, the story that we'd write is about me and you. And how did we meet? There are things in our story that we haven't figured out in the plot line of our story.
Yeah.
And I keep coming back to it, like, how did you hear me in your fucking head at the Green Gathering? But that's only a small part of it for me. How did you hear me in your head? For me, it's like, what happened to me back in that time that made me so multidimensional that somebody could hear me in their head and track me down in a field and know they'd met me when they saw me.
And find you again.
And stick by me for all the years since.
Yeah.
That's quite a chunk of stuff that's unexplained so far. It's not unexplainable. There's just so much extra information here which I've had to suppress to a certain degree in order to live in the ordinary world.
In order to tell that story so that somebody, even you and me, could understand it equally.
Yes. Yes.
We would need another metaphor.
Yes.
And the metaphor I propose is time travel happened. That because we knew each other in the future, causally we had to meet at some point. When I went to the Big Green Gathering, I was asking, between me and God, there wasn't many other people involved, how do I sort this thing out? Because I was brought up in an unreal world, the festival, for the first 7 years, and that massively imprinted on me. And then that went all corporate and I couldn't go back. And so I had to invent a new personality in order to navigate to the future, where I live in a hut in Ireland and build magic things out of wood, you know, as an old man. And in order to do that, you need at least one friend outside of yourself to solve the fucking multi-dimensional headfuck that is, as a quest. So I went to the Big Green Gathering on a quest the year after Lily died. If I'd have gone the year before, my mum bought me a ticket, but I didn't go because I was with my dad. So I saved up 2 years' ticket and spent it all at once. I made 7 triangular. I sold them all in 5 minutes, right in the middle, and came in at the punter end of the spiral galaxy that festival was built on. In the car end, you know, I bought a ticket, come in that end, worked my way through the whole spiral. I met Althea in the middle at the canyon, you know, the mini canyon. You walk up a really big canyon to get into the Green Gathering site, and in the middle of it there's a mini canyon. So it's fractally self-similar. And I was navigating, imagining that it was a simple spiral galaxy, and I was trying to get from one end to the other. And the other end of the spiral galaxy is the horse-drawn end.
Yeah.
Where people arrive in a horse. And all of the whole dynamic was different in that field than it was in the car field. Different rules altogether. And that's where I heard your voice. And I heard this Irish guy taking the piss out of me for not really knowing anything, but putting myself out. I was putting myself out in a big way, playing triangular on my own, having been brought there by my mum and left, just abandoned, without a culture. And so I was looking for someone with a culture that I could map to, so that I could learn the tools necessary to find my own bit that I could take home with me. There wasn't a thing you could buy from a fluffy go to the festival to make a living types, or the psytrance types, or the new age mystic voodoo types, or any of the different types. There was something else that had yet to be discovered in, let's say, British culture, which is an alien life form in itself, a sociological experiment that's only 1,000 years old.
Or maybe only 400 years old.
400 more likely. The Normans came in 1,000 years ago, but it took 400 years to unpackage the thing and set up the new rules, and then everybody had to learn a new language, and that takes time. And there's always dissidents like the Welsh speakers that don't really cotton on to the whole get with the program. So I was looking for someone that was clearly doing it on their own, that hadn't adopted a program from off the shelf. And so when I heard your voice in the back of my head and heard the particular accent and the particular type of taking the piss that you have when you're out there and just fucking having the crack, I thought, okay, well, this guy has got some of what I need. He's travelling through time without accepting any of the contemporary Matrix rules. And so I thought, okay, I'll tag along with him for a bit and see where I go. Like for the duration of the festival. I didn't think that it would be a lifetime or a this far into life event. But you introduced me to Aideen. You, me and Aideen kind of mind, body and spirited, and then I had a mescaline teapot with some of the heads at marinas. And it took me a long time to get out of that field. I was one of the last punters left. I got as far as the motorway on foot, and then found myself catapulted back along some 16th century trading route. I found myself back in the field. I remember a little girl, there was no one left. There was just a few people packing up. And a little girl pointed at a cloud, and it was the only cloud in the sky, and it was just pushing its way in front of the sun. Tiny little cloud, a total cloud eclipse. And she said, "Move that cloud." And I kind of looked at it and went, and it moved, because of course it did. And then if I could leave. So then I went to London, because that was, Aideen told me about the boat on the creek on the Meridian line. And that was all I had left as far as a jigsaw puzzle. You know, mescaline is not an easy trip.
It's not, is it?
No, but I had a boat on the creek on the Meridian line, and it so happens that there's only one location that figures. And so I found Creekside, and I wrote on the wall of the gate, follow the White Rabbit, and then immediately, woof, big police van with lots of lights on the front. "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm leaving a message for my friend who lives there, but it's too late to knock on their door." And they were like, "Well, stop it." So I did. And I was filthy, because obviously I hadn't really left the festival yet. I was still travelling. But I met a fellow outside Lewisham Payless, a Christian Jamaican guy called Mr. McLean. And he said, "I'm Mr. McLean. You can come to my house, no funny business. You can have a wash and then meet your friends in the morning." So I took him up on that offer. He put my clothes in the wash. I waited, put my clothes back on. It was morning. Said goodbye to Mr. McLean. And then the gate was open then, because it was morning. And then I turned up at your boat door, and you were in there hacking away on your computer. having completely reformatted your hard drive in 3 days. And you were this dude that was enrolled in Goldsmiths and was living with Aideen. And I was like, oh, okay, that's time travel. Because I met you when you were killing Kelvin and it was crazy in the festival. And you were telling me about this past that you had that was still sending knives through you every moment. Of all of the different perceptions that people had about Kelvin in that field. And you had this dude called Do, who wasn't Kelvin, and Kelvin was dead, really. And kept getting crucified, and you could do without having the crucifixion of Kelvin running through your own nervous system. So according to what you told me, you left him in that field and just left and got on with your Goldsmiths computing degree. And so I spent the day with you there and then went home to my mum. So that's the story of that.
And back to the Doctor Who analogy, I mean, that's very much the analogy of the Doctor using up one of his lifetimes to go into a different lifetime, isn't it?
That's pretty much it.
It's peculiar as fuck. Had you already been watching and gotten possessed by that Doctor Who thing at that stage?
I first heard about Doctor Who from my friend in school. I didn't have a telly. So every week, there'd be a new episode of Doctor Who, and it was the John Pertwee era, which is just this crazy dude who has a car and he drives around he doesn't have a TARDIS, he's just got a car. And he drives around Earth, mostly in England, trying to set up UNIT. And UNIT stands for United Nations Intelligence Task Force. And it's like higher than GCHQ, higher than Mossad, higher than CIA. A group of humans that make sure that any of these existential threats that may go on don't happen. And only the human is allowed to exist on Earth. They're like the continuity program for Earth. So the Doctor, that particular Doctor, Dr. Pertwee, set up UNIT. And he didn't have a TARDIS at the time. He just did it with the force of his personality alone. And so there's generals and brigadiers and colonels and sergeants and all these various ranks that are subordinate to the Doctor in the mythology because he did that. And whenever there's an emergency, like, for example, an octopus has become entangled with a superconsciousness computer and has taken over the apparatus of state, that's the sort of thing that we should probably nip in the bud as humans. You know, we've got a duty. If we thought of it, it's something that we should at least keep an eye on until it doesn't happen. And that's because I got fixated on Doctor Who before I saw it as a television programme. I identified with it more powerfully than I would have if I'd have seen it on telly. And I didn't have a telly till 95, which is when they rebooted it. So my first Doctor was Dr. Eccleston.
2005.
Yeah, 10 years after I had telly. So I got used to telly. It took me a decade. And then Doctor Who rebooted. So I fell in love with Rose Tyler, if in a manner of speaking.
And what did you think of that first Doctor then, that Eccleston guy?
Well,
what was it difficult to...
Every single incarnation of Doctor Who, apart from the 18th Doctor, which hasn't happened yet, I find really difficult to relate to. Because it isn't me. So it's cringy. It's someone else acting rather than personally motivated existential acting is a different type of acting than method acting.
Okay, here's the thing that I noticed with David Tennant is that he grew into being the Doctor Who quite well.
He did.
He became Doctor Who.
He did, yeah. He's a good actor. That's what a good actor is.
that wouldn't be peculiar to me so much until looking back at how similar he is to you, or how similar you are to him, and wondering which one of you came first. But put that aside about which one came first, because it's a non-real thing. The thing is that Doctor Who is a meme.
Yes.
And a meme is an idea that can live inside you, like Jesus.
Yeah.
So Doctor Who is actually like Jesus.
Yeah. It's an archetype.
For people who haven't got a Jesus in their soul already, there's a space there for something else. And it can be a devil, it can be a Doctor Who, it can be whatever. A job. It can just be a job.
Well, I quite like the Terminator.
But you and I are a little peculiar in not having, because our inner world is so fucking big, and our ability to express our real world as if it's more real than the so-called real world means that in the so-called real world, there's no real jobs for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds poetic and all that, but I really, really, really fucking mean it.
I know, yeah.
The thing that stops me from being able to have a job, and that's always stopped people like me from having a job going back generations, the thing that stops us from having a job is that we're full-time busy already.
Same.
Just keeping that concentration up to direct our own lives. Because being directed by someone else is a real big issue to us.
Yeah.
See, so I could work no bother on a building site and all that kind of thing, except everyone else on the building site is doing the follow the leader buzz.
Well, the same with working on a screenplay for a BBC corporation. It's a no-can-do.
It's a no-can-do. And in the thing that you mentioned earlier, if the Queen gave us a letter saying, will you write a more true version of Doctor Who, that's a grand idea, except you don't need any permit, don't need any fucking letter from the Queen.
Fine.
And so my answer to that was, look, Toby, you and I have the mythical characters for the screenplay that we'd write already. And we already know loads of other characters, not necessarily speaking to them. Certainly I'm not speaking to them anymore, but I know magical people who stood out in my life and who challenged me in various stuff, many of whom fell out with me over time. But in the analogy, there are other Time Lords.
Right.
The likes of Rob Rubb, for example.
He's a good example.
Yeah. Or Hilaire.
Right.
Or over in Ireland, there's John Crossan and all these other people.
And Marina Pepper as well, who was Hilaire's partner at the time.
Yeah.
Just to prove that Time Lords can be women too.
Yeah, and people who I still don't know what to make of.
Yeah.
You know, I still don't know where their alliance is. Certainly with Hilaire, I know his alliance is with himself.
Well, that's typical Time Lord for you.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, I look at the image of me out there, I look at what people must imagine I am from the outside, whether on the internet or people like, I wonder what Dom made of me down at Occupy and all that thing. So Dom becomes one of these mythic characters for loads of people by how he was living, and especially because he put how he was living up on videos on YouTube and promoted them and stuff. So that's in a whole force field area where we're all questioning who's in charge of us, who the fuck are these people who've made a system that mind controls people. This was a gathering of us at St. Paul's who are there trying to figure out who the fuck's called this gathering. And we're maybe only 5% of the people that were at St. Paul's. The other 95% were just going, what can I do? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Oh, go into that group and talk about this stuff. Go anywhere you want, and there's loads of places to do stuff. You want stuff to do and you don't know what to do, join any one of these groups and you do stuff with people and we'll teach you how to do it. The likes of me and Dom and all of us, we'd just get thrown out of those groups the same way as we get thrown out of any assembly line in a factory. Because we'd be saying to everybody here, let's talk about why are we doing this? And asking who owns the factory? And why aren't they here working with us? So there it is. There's real life events that we can set this screenplay in. Yeah, why make up imaginary things where the likes of you and I would meet and discuss the stuff that you and I have discussed? To get where I'm going with all this then?
Well, I'd rather do a biopic, but it seems like a bigger fish than a cheap television program. You know, the story of...
What do you mean by a biopic?
A biopic is a story of a life
Uh-huh.
in film.
Uh-huh.
Biopic, like from biography. So the narcissist in me would love to make a life story of my own life.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like a much bigger ask than making a screenplay for Doctor Who, for example. But it's probably a better one because it's wholly owned by me and the co-creators of it. Whereas Doctor Who is an intellectual property that is owned by the BBC, and even saying his name too many times triggers algorithms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I am suggesting is, what I am interested in doing is, if we're going to create something together, that we create something real out of what we've actually lived, to try and keep what we've actually lived alive, because for me it's quite dying in some ways.
Same here, man.
Without people projecting that onto me, I'm not being inspired into being speaking poetry or this or that or the other. And if it wasn't for the kids a year ago realizing that I know loads of poetry, and for the last year keeping me speaking poetry to them every night, if it wasn't for that, like, it would be incredibly dead by now, the fairy tale.
Well, good news on the kids then.
And on the internet, and on moving into the house with Tara last year, meaning that the self-employment people were looking into me, so I had to make an effort to be self-employed, being a fairy poet type thing. But that meant that I advertised it, and that meant that loads of people were like, wow, that's fucking brilliant.
One thing about Time Lords that's important to remember is Time Lords do have children. And that's a very important thing to remember, because then the narcissism of the single last Time Lord, the Doctor, according to the canon, is the last of his kind.
Uh-huh.
That's what the Time Wars was. Everyone else died.
Uh-huh.
All of his friends, all of his family, they all died. It was the Daleks what did it. And that's really traumatic. So he came back to try and solve it. And that's why he built a TARDIS, with the help of the people from Earth. The TARDIS is Earth technology, but it's future technology. So at some point in history, and this was the logic that got me into time travel to start with, as a concept, I read about the singularity and it scared the fuck out of me. I read The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil.
Did you?
Yeah, and it scared me.
Long time ago.
When I was in uni, I did interactive digital media at BA. I did 2 years of it and then quit because I had a nervous breakdown. Because of the implications of working for that thing. I knew that if I got a degree in 2006, that within 10 years I would be totally owned by either a corporation or, at the very most benign, the BBC. And I quit the first day of the third year, and the lecturer refused to sign my book, which I found very suspicious. He didn't trust me. He thought I was going to do some sort of forging his signature and making a big story out of him. That's what he thought. And he said, I'm not going to sign your fucking book. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I can't really have you as my course leader then, because if you can't sign my book, then you're not my course leader. So I better quit. So my friend on the course, the only one that actually got the BA that year, and it was the first year that they trialled it as an arts course, because they'd been running the MSc for a couple of years. And then they opened up an arts course in the art department using the same. The idea was that artists would be trained to get along with technicians so that we could build virtual reality headsets, the art for a virtual reality headset. So I had 2 years of training in that. And when I quit, I got a phone call from an agency. The first phone call said, would you have any ethical or moral objections to working for British Imperial Tobacco in the advertising department? I thought, yeah, I can think of a few. So they said, okay, never mind, and hung up. And then a week later, I get a phone call from the same lady saying, okay, we've got this for you. How about working for the web design department of the BBC Wales? And I looked at BBC Wales and asked Doctor Who, and I thought, well, yeah, that would be really cool. So I went to the interview, but then I saw how the work-life balance was going on in that room with the 300 people all wired into a warehouse-sized room. 300 people all wired in, not having any conversations, not mingling at all, just wired. I thought I wouldn't do well here. I couldn't do 5 years in this room. So what's the point? So I very dramatically overpitched the interview, and I pitched to them a massively multiplayer alternate reality game about time travel set in the year 2013. Which, given that it was 2006, was a little bit prescient. And they said, well, get back to us when you've got something, because that's a really interesting idea, but it's not the job we're advertising, so we're not in a position to give you that job. They're too low in the pyramid of the BBC to say yes to a real-life Doctor Who in real life with all of the implications of that. You know, a doctor running about amongst teenagers in a field in London in 2013 was like, too much to say yes to at that moment. But because they said yes in principle, get back to us when you've got something, is like, well, just build it and see what happens. That was what set me off. The third phone call then was working for the web design, well, the technical term was web portal officer in the government, in the Forest of Dean District Council. And this is how I met you the second time in a field. I did 5 weeks as a web portal officer in the Forest of Dean District Council with a .gov password and got security cleared. So I was meeting people in the town, because it's quite near to GCHQ. There's people that either used to work for or are aware of GCHQ as a form, because it's mind-blowingly heavy to think of a GCHQ on a daily basis, but some people have, worked for them, and some of them live in Colford. And the safe place that I'd found in Colford in the town was a gypsy lady by the name of Shirley, who had a crystal shop. And after work, I used to sit on Shirley's step, and she taught me how to use crystals by just putting them in your hand and physically going to the crystal. Like, that's all there is to it. There isn't a extra level of woo. And so I was meeting interesting people. I met a guy who was seriously traumatized because he'd worked for GCHQ as a general, and he said he may have been schizophrenic. It's the plausible deniability thing, but he told me that his name was Black Hawk, his code name, and that he'd won 7 broadswords in battle, and that if I ever needed a Chinook helicopter to land, in all seriousness, that I could call his code name and it would happen. And he was, without looking up, reading very, very low-flying planes while we were having this conversation, pedestrian aircraft, biplanes and such. And he was reading the codes, the license plates on the wings without looking up. And he told me that he had a chip in his head that was onto a server in GCHQ with a room with about 30 people in it, asking me this question: And the question that they had for me was, do we, the United Kingdom, go nuclear with Iraq? Because we'd been bombing them with depleted uranium, but we'd never actually done a Hiroshima. And I said no. And they said, hold please. And then it didn't happen. So that guy may have been schizophrenic, but he put me on to a room of government heads that were asking whether or not the United Kingdom should bomb, and they needed a single citizen to be the deciding citizen. And they asked me, and I said no. And then I thought, well, bugger this for a game of soldiers, because working for the government is not really going to do me any fucking good. So I quit and went to join the festival. And I went to the secret garden party with Leia Mainwaring, who's one of the princesses of Wales. And I took her there. It was the first time she'd ever left Swansea. She was about to go to uni, and she was really, really, really homesick. And she wouldn't have done well if she'd have just gone straight to uni, because I didn't. I fell to pieces. So I took her to the festival just to give her a, there's a big wide world out there experience. And you met her there. You kind of laughed because I was involved with a very dark-eyed, almost invisible in the room, multi-dimensional witch who's now, she's got a kid called Corin who's like 4, and he's about 7 in measurable units. His intellectual and psychological measurabilities are like, ever since he was a tiny baby, neurologists noticed that he was off the charts for brain development. So she had that baby, and she's got another one on the way, but nothing to do with me, apart from we're still friends. So that's another bit of the story.
Whereas when I turned up at that festival, I turned up there with a guy who was like Steve Reeves that did the artwork in the fairy tale, but he was a boater. But he was just like Steve. And he just rolled around the place, slaughtered drunk all the time, and had a buzz. So he'd driven me there, and it was going to be my first time to see Alien in a good few weeks. And it turned out it was where I was going to find out that me and Alien weren't together anymore at all. So that was what was going on for me. Was I was bringing the boat down from North Wales. I was maybe halfway along the journey. Been at it for 6 weeks or something.
I remember you were snogging a girl that looked like an older sister of Aideen.
She looked just like Aideen, yeah.
She did, yeah. It was uncanny.
Totally.
I met interesting heads there.
Really worthy that you bring that up, because what I'm searching for here, if we're to write a screenplay, is really we need to go through with a fine-toothed comb what are the actual gem memories that stand out that make no fucking sense in this world.
I remember at the secret Big Green Gathering, I was exhausted, and I'd met this a couple of interesting people that there'd been a ceremony invoking Vishnu as an avatar, and Vishnu's quite a big deal because he's like, if you imagine Krishna but galaxy-sized, it's a fucking absolute maelstrom of headspace that normal people cannot even get a glimpse of. Like, the nearest thing is I'll see a dude with 7 arms and go, well, bugger this. So there's a sacred dude who had all these tattoos on in Sanskrit, who'd been given to a monastery in India by circumstance when he was little, and learnt all of these ancient stories, like 1,000-year-old, at least 10,000-year-old stories. And one of them was the incarnation of Vishnu. And so he told this story while I imagined that I was the character in the story and did a puppet show of becoming Vishnu in the background of this guy's story. And a couple of people freaked out because of the puppet show, but the story was immaculate. It was just perfectly told, and it wasn't a possession. I was just allowing it to puppet me. And then I lay down and I just started talking to someone I couldn't even see about the Mayan 2012 alignments and all of the prophecies that were going on about what was going to happen in 2012 with the time wave zero and the Mayan predictions and the Queen Jubilee and the Olympics and how all of that meshed. And the person that it turned out I was talking to had the paperwork, and he put it in front of me of the graphs and all of the diagrams of this time wave. And he was Anthony Goodman, or Mr. A. Goodman, who was just there with the paperwork on the day.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, is he disincorporated? Well, bless him, because he did a great job that day.
He definitely was a good man.
Yeah, for sure.
A year or two ago, Toby. I don't know when exactly.
Well, he was Doctor Who as well. He was one of the people that had got infected by the Doctor Who virus and ran it as if he was the Doctor himself. So the Doctor met the Doctor in that field. The 18th Doctor, who's Izzy, who's the character that I wrote for myself so that I would have a place to stand whenever time started imploding on itself. And you'd be a doctor of your own right because you've got an MSc and you're your own character. You're definitely a Time Lord. And there's loads of others because none of us have gone extinct yet. We're all just bombing about on our own trips.
So in terms of the screenplay, this is where it gets deep and needs research.
Yeah.
Because in the stuff that I have in the fairy tale that I've written, it's really clear that we are a race of time-traveling fairies.
Well, figures.
Who have not forgotten who we are. And in this modern day, because the frequency of control system of personality mask, personality ego self is so strong in people and has taken over the outside world so much, it is harder for us to just hear the earth and hear who we actually are. So that fairy tale that I wrote was my expression of, I will not forget who I am. I remember all this stuff. I remember all this galactic stuff. I remember all this thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years worth of stuff. And that there is an enemy living amongst us in human form that's out to destroy nature, that somehow is trying to hunt us down multidimensionally. So there's a multidimensional aspect to the war where we're hiding looking like a human. Because if we don't hide, it hunts us down. So we're all running a kind of a spell checker to keep up normal appearances. And with the fairy tale, what I was particularly doing is throwing aside all of that disguise and saying, I'm fucking here and I'm not scared of you.
Yeah.
I'm fucking here and I'm the king of our people. And I know why I'm not scared of you. Is because you people are just a copy of us.
The difference between an archetype and a stereotype. An archetype's the original form and a stereotype is a facsimile copy.
So here we go again, the grafting of history and the grafting of prophecies. The stuff that's in the fairy tale is a prophecy for these days, saying that we can wake up, and if we all wake up, in the waking up, something's going on that resolves the ancient war between good and evil. And it has a confidence in it, that prophecy has a confidence in it, that we are of the earth, and we are staying here in the earth, and this thing that is not of the earth is leaving the earth. That a false myth is going to die, and the real myth remains. In the last few years, looking into all the technology stuff, in the last, say, 2 or 3 years, it's getting very hard to believe my own fairy tale about all that stuff. And it's largely because all that 2012 stuff was projected, which is like a false myth.
Yeah.
So it turns out the whole 2012 thing, like the flat earth thing or any of the other psyops that have gone off, it was just a psyop.
Yeah.
So that's muddied the water for all of us for the 5 or 10 years before 2012, because in our alternative world, it was sent around like a meme.
Well, while I was in it,
and it muddied the waters.
of course it did. But even in the meme itself, apparently no psychics could see beyond 2012. Before 2012, it was just white noise static.
Yeah.
Which makes sense in the narrative.
Yeah, it makes sense in the post narrative in terms of all this AI stuff. To me,
yes,
somewhere in the last year, I realized this AI stuff goes back to 2012. That the turning point in the singularity is in 2012.
That's
the very fact that that's not being said out there in the world largely indicates that that's probably the truth of things.
When I read the singularity is near, I put the date as 2013. I was like, oh fuck, I've got 7 years to get something together that's a narrative that I can have as a personal, if all else fails, become a time traveler. Because a whole lot of shit is going to crash as far as the infrastructure of mind. A whole load of systems of thought are going to fall on sword in that period. So become a time traveler was what I trained myself to do, and that's how we met when I first met you in the Big Green Gathering. I was a newbie, just a day one government issue fucking time traveler, trying to find how humans existed before it all went off. And that's kind of how I kept finding you as well. Because when we did that event, the time travel event at the George, and everything went fucking totally multi-dimensional and